Deep in the icy mountains north of the Silver Marshes is the ancient fire giant fortress Iron Slag. Duke Zalto and his fire giants unlocked and reclaimed the forge several months ago. Since then, the fire giants have captured slaves and put them to work in the dungeon. Characters who visit Iron Slag must contend not only with the fire giant Duke, his family, and his most loyal followers, but also with a village of sinister Yakfolk. If the characters obtain Zalto's conch of teleportation, they can use it to travel to Maelstrom, Hecaton's undersea citadel. Duke Zalto is one of the greatest warmongers of his age. With Hecaton missing, he has set into motion a plot to wage war on dragonkind for the divine favor of Onum the Allfather. It begins with the reconstruction of the Vonendod, a dragon-slaying colossus built by his ancient ancestors. Zalto is feeling the pressure, given that his success hinges on his ability to reignite Iron Slag's adamantine forge, and his minion's ability to retrieve all the missing fragments of the Vonendod. Unfortunately for the Duke, those are the least of his problems. The arrogant fire giant failed to account for the interference of puny adventurers. Duke Zalto also has a nagging wife, Brimskarda, and two ill-tempered children, a daughter, Cinderhild, and a son, Zaltimbur. The children distract him while the wife chastises him for not acting quickly enough, as she fears that one of the other giant lords will win the god's favor first. The Duke's family may play a pivotal role in the success of weaker parties, as they are unlikely to be able to confront him directly. The adventurers can get many leads that point to Iron Slag in Chapter 3 of the campaign. The dwarves of Citadel Adbar and Citadel Felbar are aware that the fire giants have returned to Iron Slag, and both locations have unique encounters related to the fire giants. However, the dwarves are still recovering from the War of the Silver Marches and aren't prepared to mount an attack on the giant fortress and give the adventurers a quest that takes them there instead. In fact, Citadel Adbar has an encounter where the party can even learn the sinister nature of the Yakfolk prior to meeting the tribe, which can give them an edge in that future encounter. If you want the Yakfolk Village to remain a surprise, you can simply use the encounter from Citadel Felbar instead that gives the party a reward for defeating Duke Zalto. This, of course, adds this as a side objective, as the main goal is simply to recover the conch of teleportation. Furthermore, if you don't want the party to learn Iron Slag's exact location without the Oracle's guidance, you can have the quest givers simply say caravans and travelers have been going missing in the mountains, and leave it up to the party to find the source themselves. Finally, if the party travels to the underground dwarven city of Grontelgrim, they will not only get to meet the famous hero Brunor Battlehammer, but they will also encounter a party of drow from House Zolaran. These drow have allied themselves with Duke Zalto. The Duke promises to help them destroy their enemies if the drow help him steal Megara, the fire primordial trapped within Grontelgrim. House Zolaran once held Grontelgrim, but Brunor Battlehammer and his dwarves recently drove out the Dark Elves. They know its layout well, and Duke Zalto has given the drow an iron flask in which to trap Megara. The party encounters the drow after they have already stolen the fire primordial, but before they have slipped back into the secret tunnel they used to enter the city undetected. If you run this as written, the party has little chance of actually catching up with the drow, and are in for a big fight if they do. If the party seems like they are able to bypass the magical hazards made by the two wizards, have some or all of the drow warriors break off and stall the adventurers, while the mages escape with the fire primordial. This encounter has little chance of actually allowing the party to learn the location of Iron Slag unless they capture one of the drow and learn information from them. I still like this encounter as it serves as additional world building and can make the party feel a tiny loss that gets redeemed later in the adventure. This, again, gives the players a new goal in Iron Slag as well, the recovery and the return of Megara to Grontelgrim. Once the party learns the location of Iron Slag from one of these encounters, or from the Oracle, they can easily travel by foot or by using the airship. As the book states, anyone approaching Mount Hammerhast by air can see the staircase carved into the mountain, the Yakfolk Village perched on the mountainside, and the great adamantine doors at the foot of the mountain. The cultists or any companions would suggest a stealthy approach to the doors, and then up the stairs when the doors prove to be a dead end. I would remove any returning fire giants unless the party spends a fair amount of time camped out by the door, as this seems like a far too simple way to get into the dungeon. If your party seems intent on waiting for the door to open, have the drow of House Zolaran show up instead, greeted by the Duke and his hellhounds. If the party decides to fly the airship or any mounts up the side of the mountain, the Chimera attacks. Have it target the balloon of the airship and then return to its cave after bringing the airship down, waiting for the adventurers. Consider making the Chimera more powerful or even legendary to make it stand out a bit, because a party of adventurers at this stage shouldn't have too much trouble with it. If the party is able to defeat the Chimera before it brings the airship down, then they would be able to fly up to the Yakfolk Village, which causes the Yakfolk to raise the alarm and become hostile. Ideally, this should be the last use case, as this encounter works much better when the characters approach by foot and the Yakfolk are able to play the part of benevolent host. More on that in the next section. After the party ascends the 12,000 steps and defeats the chimera guarding the approach, they arrive at the Yakfolk Village. There is no one there to greet them, and unless the party shouts over the walls, no one comes to let them inside. This does give the players the opportunity to peer over the walls if they have the means to do so, or attempt to sneak inside of the village. The most obvious sign that something is amiss in the village is the slaves working in the crop fields. There are also a number of empty cages in various areas outside in the village, however they are all currently empty. If they're able to spy on the village and learn about the slaves, they might not fall for any tricks so easily. Don't forget that the characters sneaking into the village have to pass a stealth check or get spotted by the guard in the crop fields. If the party announces their presence, Chief Karthikeya welcomes them with open arms, as the book suggests, but not before making sure his village is as presentable as possible. First, he would hide all the humanoid slaves inside the other huts and have them be guarded by the Yakfolk warriors. He would send a couple Yakfolk to work in the fields to give off the perception of a hard-working, simple people. If the players ask about the large cages, he claims they were for livestock, but unfortunately their new neighbors, the fire giants, recently came by and demanded them for themselves, which is a blatant lie. Chief Karthikeya should lead the players into his hut and offer them the delicacies of the Yakfolk people described in the book. Don't forget to mention the beautiful landscapes painted on the walls to try and disarm the characters' defenses even more. Be sure to mention how the chief and his wives all partake of the food and the pipe that are secretly poisoned. 2 Yakfolk warriors should be standing guard at the entrance to the hut as well to provide extra support when conflict arises. If asked about the fire giants, Chief Karthikeya laments with the party of tales of woe and misfortune. He claims the fire giants moved back into the ancient forge some time ago and began demanding tribute from them. Since then, they have had to limit their meat consumption and the food pantries are running low. Many of the village's population have been forced to establish trade with local communities, and the chief is attempting to find a new location to move the village, sending his best warriors on scouting missions. Furthermore, the chief claims the fire giants have even been kidnapping travelers along the roads and sending them to work in the mines. The Yakfolk hear the echoes of men working from the elevator shaft. These false tales are meant to paint the Yakfolk as victims of circumstance who have no evil intentions and will hopefully disarm the characters even further, enough to partake of the food. Maybe even provide some negligible benefit for players that eat the food, like 1d4 temporary hit points. Once the chief has been able to tell his stories, and the party has regaled him with tales of their own, an hour should have passed in-game, and everyone will have to make saving throws on the sleeping agent that taints the food and pipeweed. Unless every single member of the party falls unconscious, then combat begins. On the first round of combat, the chief or one of his wives will ring the gong, whoever rolls higher in initiative. The Yakfolk warriors positioned around the village then take the time to kill their slaves, then rush to the chief's hut to confront the party. If all members of the party fail their save, this is essentially a TVK, as the entire party becomes enslaved by the Yakfolk. You can, of course, have this be circumvented in a grand number of ways. One idea is to have a battalion of dwarves show up, who rescue the characters sent by King Harnoth of Citadel Adbar, King Morin and Queen Tithmel of Citadel Felbar, or King Brunor Battlehammer of Grotolgrim. Or you could just have the party perform a classic Elder Scrolls prison break, maybe even using the elven slaves as backup. However, it is unlikely that everyone will fail the save. Don't forget that half-elves and elves can't even fail to begin with, and dwarves have advantage on the saving throw. Members of the party who did not succumb to the sleeping poison will need to act fast to awaken their companions and defeat the villainous Yakfolk chief. If they act particularly quickly in the defeat of the Yakfolk, perhaps the slaves are not all slain yet, and they can still save some of them, most notably the elf princess that is among them. But this is really up to the DM, as this is another side character to keep up with and adds another objective to the party's long laundry list of optional tasks for Iron Slag. Once the party clears out the Yakfolk Village, they can rest here, then descend into Iron Slag. The fire giants don't regularly check on the village, so a long rest shouldn't cause any issues, and there are plenty of encounters to test the party below. Once the party gets into the elevator shaft, either by doing the athletics check on the door or by traversing the crossbeam of the water wheel, they are presented with 2 options. Either they take the elevator down into darkness, or descend the long stairs into the mines. The players will have little to go on other than instinct, and their choice is anyone's guess, and I will be going over all the branching paths. Luckily, the first encounter in the mines can be run no matter which choice the party makes. If the party chooses to take the stairs, they have a long, cold journey through the tunnels of the mines, with the sound of pickaxes growing with their descent. Once arriving at the deepest level of the mines, they run into 2 salamanders, who give them a warm welcome. You get it? The salamanders are watching over some of Zalto's prisoners, and these guys can give the party a decent amount of info once they are rescued. And the book even offers the party a guide, which is a great tool for guiding the party's path in the dungeon ahead. If the party took the elevator instead, the book mentions that it makes a series of programmed stops at 15 different locations, which includes each level of the mine. Simply have the elevator slow to a stop at the last level of the mine right in the middle of the salamanders and the enslaved humanoids. Roll initiative and begin combat. On initiative count 20, the elevator stage advances, and the book says it remains on each floor for 30 seconds, so after 5 rounds, the elevator would begin to creep down once again, giving the players maybe one more round at best to decide if they are staying on. Many parties will have no trouble dealing with 2 salamanders within 5 rounds, but if you place the elevator and the salamanders a fair distance apart with some cover for them to hide behind, the party might have to make more of a conscious decision to fight them. If the salamander sees the party and the party ignores them or flees from them down the elevator, then they would be able to alert part of the dungeon as they are only up 1 floor and they can reach the ore depository relatively quickly. One last note, if your party destroyed the water wheel, thus disabling the elevator entirely, the book says Duke Zalto sends a fire giant up to investigate. You can choose to have this fire giant encounter the party solo while they are descending through the mines, or you can have him be with the salamanders to punish the party further for tampering with the elevator. Once the party has defeated the salamanders, they would get Worry Fleagle as a guide, as mentioned earlier. She is a friendly gnome who offers to guide the party around Ironslag with the goal of rescuing more of the prisoners. She would try to convince the party to follow her to the ore depository, as she is familiar with the path and knows her companions are in that direction. She would be hesitant to ride the elevator down as she has only seen fire giants use it and does not know where it leads. We are going to assume the party is following the direction of Worry for now, but we will get back to the elevator path later. The players emerge from the mine tunnels into the ore depository. If they make any attempt to be stealthy, then they will be able to scout this room and see the salamander and the 4 dwarven prisoners, as they are pretty preoccupied. The salamander should be easy to deal with, but it should at least try to escape to the upper foundry, being outnumbered and alone. Most parties will still be able to stop him, with spells or grapples, but he should at least make an attempt. When the dwarves are liberated, or if they are left alone, they leave out the mine shaft. This will eventually halt production and alert the entire dungeon, as mentioned in the book. Worry would inform the players that the other slaves are through the upper foundry, but she would also squeamishly mention that a large number of fire giants are present in that room. The players may choose to follow her to the upper foundry or chase the salamander that way anyway. They may also decide to hop into one of the buckets and ride towards the upper assembly hall, but let's follow Worry for now. If the salamander escapes, it simply flees, but it also causes the ogres in the upper foundry to investigate. In the upper foundry, the players will encounter one of Zalto's children, Zaltenber. He is threatening to kill one of the prisoners without much luck, and the inhabitants of this room are thoroughly distracted by his antics. The party should be able to observe without causing attention to themselves, as long as they don't make too much noise and don't step out into the open. If the party does nothing, eventually Saltenberg brings the slave back to the slave wheel and sets him back to work, before retreating to his room to pout. Ideally, the party intervenes to save the slave, which amuses Zaltenberg greatly. If the party makes their presence known, Zaltenberg orders the ogres to attack, and the 4 fire giants in the lower foundry begin flinging molten iron, which does some serious damage. One thing to note about these fire giants is that they are unarmored blacksmiths. The book doesn't mention it, but they should have reduced armor class. Let's say 13 for natural armor. They would also probably use hammers, not great swords, and deal a 3d10 plus 7 on a hit. Also, remember that the railing is 50 feet above them, so all of their ranged attacks will be at disadvantage. Finally, if Zalto sent a giant to check on the elevator earlier, it was one of these, so there might only be 3 of them. Anyway, the fire giants start throwing molten iron, which should probably indicate to your party that they need to get out of this room quickly. The book says that 3 more fire giants come out of the forges, responding to the sound of combat in the lower foundry. You can choose to ignore these, unless you've got a party of all fire genocide who are just breezing through iron slag so far. The ogres should serve as proper fodder for your party to contest with them as they run to the rescue of the innocent slave. Zaltenberg should taunt the party as they approach and maintain his position. If it becomes clear that the party is going to make it past the ogres and is almost to him, he begins to flee down the stairs, taking the slave with him. Ideally, the party should aim to follow him towards the stairs as quickly as possible and not actively try to kill the fire giants. If they capture or subdue Zaltenberg, they will be able to bargain with the fire giants and Duke Zalto for the conch of teleportation. This of course won't free all of the slaves, but it will accomplish the primary goal of obtaining the conch. This is one way the party can beat the dungeon and live to fight another day. If they one day return with the goal of defeating Zalto later in the adventure, maybe they will use another pathway. Or, I don't know, maybe your party can take on 4 ogres, 7 fire giants who are flinging molten iron at them, and still go kill Zalto and his fire pups, and free all the slaves. I can't imagine Zaltenberg making it all the way to his mother in the kitchen like the book suggests, but if he does, your party is probably in trouble. If the players decided to ride the bucket chain earlier, they are going to get a nice overhead look at the Duke and his puffs, and the incomplete Vonendad strung up all over the chamber. Truly a sight to behold. They will also catch a glimpse of the other side of the adamantine door that hindered their progress much earlier. The bucket chain will soon whisk them away to the tunnel before the dressing mill, and any party with sense will use this as an opportunity to disembark from the bucket and approach on foot. 8 orcs are in the next chamber, and if the party liberated the slaves in the previous area, they may be sitting around waiting for more ore to arrive. This encounter is pretty straightforward, but if the party defeats the giant, they can convince the orcs to back down, as they are technically slaves. After the combat, the party will take notice of the elevator. If it is still operational, they can wait for it to show up and ride it to the lower levels. If your party rode the elevator down to begin with, they might end up here first, and would no doubt be spotted by the orcs and the fire giant when they appear. Be sure to roll initiative and keep track of the elevator, as I mentioned before in the mine situation. Now your party has another choice. Do they ride the elevator down, or do they take the bucket? If Worry is still with them, she might suggest riding the bucket, as she knows it will eventually take them to the other slaves at the slave wheel, so let's do that first. Once the party enters the upper assembly hall area again in the bucket, they may decide to hop out and then go down the stairs to confront Zalto. I'll cover the confrontation with Zalto in part 5. For now, let's assume that they head to the slave wheel. Once they're in that room, they may attract the attention of the 2 ogres watching over the slaves, which causes the fire giant in the office to emerge and free all 7 hellhounds. Absolute chaos should ensue at this point. If the party manages to survive this one, they certainly deserve inspiration for freeing all these slaves. However, they aren't quite out of the frying pan yet. If Worry is still alive, she would suggest the party go through the door to the upper foundry and back to the ore depository to get to the mines and escape. Once the party opens the door, they find Saltenberg dangling the slave above the molten iron as before, and you can pick up that encounter pretty easily. The difference is the party is in a much better position to capture Zaltenberg, as they should be right next to him when they open the door. Finally, we have arrived at what happens if the party just goes straight down the elevator and says f*** it to the rest of the dungeon, or if they just end up here at some point anyway. Once again, the party is presented with a choice. They should see before them a massive room full of goblins cleaning, too distracted to notice them, and then the assembly hall to the side. The party may choose to go and confront Zalto, or they may not know what they're getting themselves into if they head into the assembly hall, but if the party goes into the feast hall, the goblins continue to clean and ignore them, assuming, like always, that guests are none of their business. If they are attacked, they flee as said in the book, which spells immediate trouble for your party. There's also another fire giant child back here, Cinderhild, who is much easier to bargain with than her brother. This is by far the easiest way for the party to retrieve the conch and escape without bloodshed. The party can also go into Zalto's chamber here and simply steal the conch if they have the skill to do so. However, when they go into the back rooms, one of the goblins thinks it to be wise to alert the fire giant Duchess, who then confronts the party when they emerge from the hallway. If the party doesn't have Cinderhild with them, they will have to face Duchess Brimskarda, her 2 ogre cooks, and upwards of 50 goblins from the kitchen and feasting hall area. If the Duchess is about to die, she surrenders, and can be used to bargain with the Duke as their children would be. Don't forget she co-opts a potion of invulnerability on the first round of combat. Most parties running Ironslag as their first giant lair will have no reason to confront Zalto, and will simply take the conch and leave. And that truly is the intention of the dungeon. But many parties will challenge all of the giant lords at some point in the adventure, and to truly thwart the Duke, he must be struck down. So, the party has arrived at the assembly hall to confront Duke Zalto, and they are looking for a fight. Depending on the path the party has taken thus far, they may have faced a couple of fire giants and a handful of other foes. All the other paths away from the Duke lead to much larger battles, but can also lead the party to one of the Duke's children, offering them a means to bargain and escape from a potential TPK. There's also a chance your party went straight down the elevator and then to the Duke. But if you're following my guide, that will at least have them encounter the salamanders in the mine and the orcs and fire giant in the dressing mill. The Duke is a fire giant and is formidable, but alone he is hardly a threat for a powerful party. He is playing with his 2 hellhounds in the assembly hall, waiting for the drow of House Solarin to arrive. The drow should arrive as the party does, which provides much needed protection for the Duke in this fight. If the drow is too powerful of a group for your party, or they were slain earlier in the adventure, then have the Duchess burst in through the door with a force of goblins during the battle. For powerful parties, consider using both groups. Sidebar, it has always been a disappointment to me, and probably a lot of you, that the Vonendad is simply a plot device, and not an actual mech robot boss fight. If you want to stay true to the book, you can allow some goblins to climb the rafters and drop the suspended pieces of the Vonendad using the levers in the upper assembly hall. The book says that an athletics check must be done, so send a few goblins to each one to get the job done and help each other. Don't forget about Zalto's Ring of Lightning Resistance, and the prisoner that he has inside of his hammer, which is wild, by the way. If the Duke drops below half health and he is in possession of the Iron Flask with Megara inside, he strides over to the Adamantine Forge and releases the Fire Primordial inside. This prompts all creatures that aren't immune to fire to flee, most notably the Drow. The goblins would basically become incinerated immediately if they are around, so try to use them up. If the Duke is close to death, he bargains for his life with his treasures. He would not give up Megaria or his family, and attempts to kill anyone who demands either. The Duke gladly hands over the Contra teleportation for his life, and with it the party can teleport to Maelstrom, and enter the next stage of the adventure. Well, that is the video. The Forge is quite a dungeon, and probably the most complicated of all the giant layers. It has a ton of moving parts, literally, and can be a bit overwhelming at times, but it is probably the most interesting, and feels really well integrated into the setting, with the dwarves and the drow and the Yakfolk and all that. I do really wish the Vonindod was a super mech anime boss fight, but you know, that's what Homebrew is for. Don't forget to check back for the next and final of the evil giant layers, the Castle of the Cloud Giants. Thanks for watching.